Tear Fund itself came out of a cry for help 50 odd years ago. The church in the UK was seeing on the television screens great, need in Nigeria around the Biafra crisis and refugees. And Christians just started sending money into the Evangelical Alliance. And it was checks and cash were put onto a table and put into a nice little box. And that box was called the Evangelical Alliance Relief Fund. And 50 odd years later, it's no longer just a box on a table, but an organization that works in the 50 of the poorest countries around the world. And it's gone from being a time where we used to basically literally put money into a suitcase and fly out to Nigeria and find churches doing things and needing to distribute food and just saying, well, here's the cash, let's go ahead, to an organization that works in 50 countries in a multiple ways. But one of our major ways of working is asset-based development, or as we call it, Tear Fund, church and community transformation. Now, the whole basis of our Tear Fund work came out of actually churches in Africa and our development staff in Africa seeing that when local churches were really involved in their development processes and not just the NGO turning up and distributing food and saying, yes, this is the best way to do it, but actually when churches were really involved and taking a key part in that development process, that actually the projects were more successful, they lasted longer, they were more sustainable. And they started thinking, actually, why is this the case? And actually, they started really researching this. And the whole point of actually our theory of poverty at Tear Fund is often poverty is not really just about things or giving people stuff. Because if you look at Africa, lots of stuff has been given, but sometimes the actual real root cause of the poverty isn't actually lack of stuff, but broken relationships. Now, as Christians, we believe the ultimate broken relationship comes from the fall, when humans broke the relationship with God. And this brokenness and sin has seeped into all different parts of our society and ourselves. We have broken relationships with ourselves. Some people are very confident and too confident, arrogant, and believe they're the kings of the world, while other people don't believe they're worthy. Broken relationships with each other, the otherism that's broken into our society and our world at the moment, where it's always somebody else's fault. It's the migrant's fault, it's the unemployed person's fault, or it's the billionaire's fault. It can go both ways. And also our broken relationships with creation. We live in a world where we're consuming in a certain way that we seem to believe we have 10 worlds, not just the one world we are called in the Bible to look after. So Tear Fund ultimately believes that if we're going to solve poverty, we need to restore those relationships to ultimately make that a sustainable thing, not just it to be about a distribution of things. And that's what I'm just so encouraged about, the conversation I've just heard about, of people, communities and churches and governments and MPs talking together and having a relationship, discussing, working out, planning things. And it's just so encouraging to see the stronger relationships of those will be the ones that succeed. The ones where there isn't a weak relationship or fallings out happen, sadly, those communities won't be transformed. So Tear Fund has been doing this process for over 20 years in many countries around the world. And it is basically where the local church is trained and equipped to demonstrate the gospel through a series of Bible studies and facilitated community meetings, really for them to understand what is the actual vision for the church in the community, so that they can be salt and light, and that they're all made in the image of God. And it's really looking at scripture to get that envisioning. They also then start looking at their problems and what the provision of their local resources are. My favorite Bible study that we study is Elisha and the oil jars with the widow. What Elisha says, what do you have in your house? She said, oh, just a little oil. Or what does your community have? The jars. And when you get that together, God gets involved and miracles happen and the oil carries on flowing. And I believe this is the stuff that you will start seeing in your communities when you start doing this. And so it's not just about the church doing these things on its own for themselves or doing it to the community, but doing it with the community, really knowing what their problems are and knowing how they can find the solutions and resources to move forward on that. So just an example of that, maybe you're going to hear some more about Zimbabwe later as well in the video, but I was impacted this when I went to Zimbabwe and saw this. This is a church, this is a school building that was falling down, and the church community got together, went through the process and built their own school. Not a single input from Tear Fund on building, on bricks, on any kind of things. It was just the process of envisioning that we went through them and showed them the resources they had. They found uncles who were bricklayers and plasterers and carpenters, and they built it themselves. They found their own resources. They got some money out of the local government. And it was that this wasn't just wall. They built dams and bridges, and they started to build houses and clinics. It was just incredible to see the change and development of that. When we look at scripture, when we come together, when we work on, you know, they were a divided community before, and now they were united in their common purpose. And it was just great to see this flourishing and transformation. As I said before, Tear Fund has got great experience of this across the board. We've done it for 20 years in over 40 countries, in places where the church is in majority setting like Zimbabwe, or minority settings like Nepal or Cambodia. And we've got different learnings of how that works, you know, in those different communities. So we've got lots to maybe learn and share with when you're working in cities where majority of people aren't Christians or maybe coming from other faiths. And we do this now each year with over 20,000 churches and, you know, tens of millions of beneficiaries around the world over the last 20 years. And I'll just end on this bit, is what we're trying to do at the moment, and this might be of interest to you, is linking up some UK church leaders with experienced Tear Fund staff who are often church leaders in themselves, to sort of pray, study and have some dialogue together, where they're really just hearing from these church leaders in the global south about what their experience is and working in, you know, working in in crisis situations. You know, it's quite new for maybe us to be seeing the church actually needing to be an agent of change in a crisis. But if you're living in DRC or South Sudan, the church is probably the only person who's actually there to help you out in the crisis. And they've been dealing with these for a long time. And so we've done this already with the diocese in St. Albans. And I think it'd be really good just for you guys. Obviously, your guys are envisioned, you're ready to go. You don't need the basics, but it might be more sort of things around how do we make sure we don't have mission creep and we stick to the things we're meant to do best? How do we stop burnout and make sure we build capacity in our organizations to be able to apply for funds, manage funds, make sure projects have got good objectives and good outcomes at the end of it. And so I think these conversations that we're having with communities and church leaders are really very flexible, and we're really allowing basically communication and conversation to happen. And it'd be great to hear if any of your any of these conversations would be helpful within your settings and with your groups of churches in your city.
One community called Irisville. We have a church leader who was trained, was called Pastor Sihlola. He came for training and then went back to Irisville to train the church. So he started off initially with one church, but was able to mobilize the pastors fraternal. So the pastors fraternal in this community called Irisville is a fraternal that has over 18 churches, which was brilliant because he was then able to envision a large group of churches together. They came together, they were trained, they went through Bible studies, they went through community description, they described their community. And when they described their community, they were really angry. As part of the description, they realized that their children were using a horse, and although there was a farm before that used to host some horses, and the owner had left. So it's the stables that were now being used as a school. So they had the chairs there, they had broken windows, the floor was really messy. They started asking themselves the questions, how much do we expect our children to get from a school like this? How much can we retain good teachers in a school like this? What conditions have we created, firstly for our children to thrive, but also for our teachers to be motivated and to teach our children well? They got angry. They realized we need to do something about it. They mobilized households in Irisville, came up with a plan where each household was supposed to contribute 100 bricks, some wheelbarrows of sand, some water, and a bit of financial resources to then pay some of the builders who came. They were able to identify locally available builders within the community, some who worked for free, just in the construction of the school. And after a few months, they were able to build an amazing school for their children. So the children then left these old horse stables and moved on to this amazing new school that was built by the community. At some point, they got stuck. They were, particularly when they got to the roofing level, but they were able to realize, some of the resources within the community are organizations.
Yes.
They mobilized some organizations to also contribute to the roofing of the school.
Yeah.
The school has been complete for years now. The children are motivated and excited to be in an amazing school. If you see the pictures between the old school and the new school, you can't even imagine that, the stables used to be full. The same community, they realized as well that during the rainy season, the bridge usually is full. Literally, children can't pass. They can't go to school for days or weeks sometimes because there'll be too much water. They also realized they needed to do something about it. They were able to trace back and say, this has been a problem for years. No one is coming to fix our bridge for us. Same process, they came together, they came up with a plan, they did a bill of quantities, they were able to identify the resources that they needed to construct a bridge. They constructed an amazing bridge. So now even within the rainy season, the school children can still pass and go to school and go back home, which is really good.